Continuous insulation is defined by ASHRAE as insulation that is continuous across all framing members, eliminating any thermal bridging in the structure. And there would not be any penetrations in the insulation with the exception of fasteners or service openings. Continuous insulation can be installed on the interior side of the wall, the exterior side of the wall, or integral to any opaque surface on the exterior of the wall. The reason why it's important is because in actuality, when you look at a typical wall as it has been built for years, that is insulated simply with stud cavity insulation, you will find that there is significant thermal leakage from the interior side of the building to the exterior through the studs themselves. Metal studs are a conductor. Wood studs are also a conductor, although to a lesser degree. But I'm sure we've all driven past a building and seen the outlines of the studs, or even on a roof, seen the outlines of the rafters through the roofing material. And what happens there is that if there's a frost outside, you've got heat coming from the inside of the house that melts that frost away where the stud is conducting the heat. So what continuous insulation is designed to do is go across those studs, providing insulation value to keep that heat from exiting the building or traveling outside, and eliminating that thermal loss. The code compliances that go along with continuous insulation and the organizations that play a part in the requirement of continuous insulation would be the IBC, the IRC, the IECC, and ASHRAE. And how they all fit into the mix can be a jumble of the alphabet. Essentially, the I codes encompass the IBC, which is the International Building Code, Commercial Code, the IRC, the International Residential Code for residential construction, and the IECC, which is the International Energy Conservation Code. Those codes are all influenced by an organization called ASHRAE, and ASHRAE is the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers. And ASHRAE is a consensus organization that takes experts in the field of heating and cooling buildings and gets them together to establish requirements for commercial buildings specifically as to what is the best way to build an energy efficient building. And ASHRAE puts these standards together that deal with insulation, not just above grade walls, but also roofs, below grade walls. They also get into fenestration and window issues, but in this ASHRAE standard 90.1, it deals with all buildings with the exception of low-rise residential. And they create uniform standards agreed upon by experts across the country as to this is the best way to create energy efficiency in buildings. That ASHRAE 90.1 standard is then used, and it's actually referenced in law by National Energy Policy Acts as the minimum standard to which all states must conform. So the I codes, with the exception of the International Residential Code, because the ASHRAE standard is aimed solely at commercial buildings, the I codes then take that ASHRAE 90.1 standard and typically will incorporate that into parts of the actual building code or the actual energy code. And in simplest terms, they're all intertwined. It tends to be that revisions occur in ASHRAE, and then over the course of a year or two following, you will see those exact revisions appear in a version of the I codes. And that's how they're related. Continuous insulation is referenced in ASHRAE 90.1, and actually the amounts of continuous insulation being referenced in ASHRAE 90.1 are on the increase. Typically, at least for the last several years, ASHRAE revises the 90.1 standard on a 3-year cycle. And they did it in 2004, 2007, 2010. And each year, you will see the requirements for above-grade walls, continuous insulation, increasing across all climate zones of the United States. This is not going to stop anytime soon. And originally, when they first came out with the requirement for continuous insulation, it tended to be the more northern tier climate zones in the country. And as they've gone through each iteration, each climate zone has had a continuous insulation requirement added to it, including the furthest southern climate zones in the United States with the most recent versions of ASHRAE 90.1. And those are designated in the standard by the letter CI right behind the R value requirement for that particular wall.